This is Mike Clark. You're listening to an emergency wildlife and public safety broadcast. If you're hearing this clearly, stay with us. What we're about to describe may sound subtle at first, almost insignificant, but the scale of what's unfolding is anything but. Since early this morning, emergency services, park rangers, and environmental monitoring stations across multiple regions have been logging the same anomaly. The forest has gone quiet. Not quieter than usual. Not seasonal. Silent. No bird song at dawn. No insects at dusk. No wind response through the canopy, even in areas where weather data confirms steady air movement. Rangers report stepping into wooded areas and hearing nothing but their own breathing. Hunters describe the absence as disorienting, like walking into a room where sound has been turned off. Officials are advising all recreational activity, hiking, hunting, camping, to be suspended until further notice. Not because of a confirmed threat, but because silence on this scale is not neutral. It is a signal that something has disrupted the most basic rhythms of the environment, and right now, we do not understand what replaced them. We've received dozens of messages from listeners who thought they were imagining it at first. One caller from the North Ridge said he stood outside for nearly 10 minutes waiting to hear a single bird. Nothing. Another said the lack of insects was what frightened her most. No buzzing near porch lights. No movement in the grass. Environmental scientists on standby describe this as a system-wide behavioral withdrawal, a term usually reserved for chemical spills or seismic precursors. But no spill has been detected. No quake registered. The weather is stable. The silence does not match any known pattern. And when nature goes quiet all at once, it usually means it sensed something before we did. As this quiet spread through rural zones, a second pattern began to emerge, one that pushed this situation from environmental anomaly into immediate public risk. Drivers across multiple counties began calling in reports of deer standing in the roadways. Not crossing, not startled, standing. Herds positioned across highways, farm roads, and access routes, unresponsive to horns, headlights, flashing beams, or shouting. Traffic cameras confirm it. Vehicles are stopped for miles in some corridors, engines running, drivers staying inside because the animals do not move when approached. In several cases, they do not even turn their heads. Authorities are asking motorists to remain in their vehicles, keep doors locked, and avoid prolonged eye contact. That last instruction was added quietly, without explanation, during a secondary advisory. When asked for clarification, officials stated only that agitation increases when drivers attempt to engage the animals directly. One truck driver described it as waiting at a red light that never changes. Another said the deer were close enough to touch, yet completely unreactive, even as rain and wind picked up around them. Wildlife officers attempted controlled dispersal using sound deterrents. There was no response. Thermal imaging shows normal body heat, but movement is minimal, synchronized, almost static. Traffic authorities are now rerouting where possible, but in remote areas, there are no alternate paths. If you are stopped right now because of this, stay where you are unless instructed otherwise. Do not attempt to drive through. These animals are not behaving according to any stress response we recognize, and unpredictability is the most dangerous variable we have. And now, we need to address the reports coming in from wildlife management teams, because this is where certainty breaks down. Officers conducting aerial and ground observation of affected herds are documenting physical changes. Abnormal antler growth, dense, asymmetrical, branching in ways that do not follow genetic or age-related patterns. Skeletal deformities along the spine and shoulders. In some cases, growths appear to be layered, as if formed in stages rather than naturally grown. Initial public statements reference disease, chronic wasting, fungal infections, environmental exposure, but internal field notes describe features that do not match known pathology. These changes are appearing across different age groups, different regions, and different migration paths simultaneously. That should not be possible. One officer reported that an animal turned its head slowly toward him, not in alarm, not in curiosity, but as if responding to a stimulus he couldn't perceive. Another noted that the herd maintained formation even when a helicopter passed overhead at low altitude. There was no scatter response, no flight, just adjustment, slight repositioning, and stillness again. Samples have been collected, but analysis takes time, and time is the one thing this situation is not giving us generously. Until more is known, officials are urging the public to avoid all contact with wildlife, alive or dead. Do not attempt to assist. Do not attempt to put animals down. Do not assume this is illness in the traditional sense. Right now, the forest is quiet. The roads are blocked. And the animals we thought we understood are behaving in ways that suggest something has changed beneath the surface. Something systemic. We will continue broadcasting updates as they come in. Keep your radios on. Stay where you are unless directed otherwise. And if you're in a place where the woods are usually loud, and tonight they are not, pay attention. Silence, in nature, is rarely empty. This is Mike Clark. You're listening to an ongoing emergency wildlife and public safety broadcast. If you're just joining us, understand this clearly. What began as silence in the forests has evolved into behavior that authorities are now struggling to describe without contradiction. Over the last 12 hours, wildlife agencies across multiple regions have confirmed a new and deeply unsettling pattern. Trail cameras, motion-activated systems normally used to monitor migration, population health, and predator movement, are capturing the same animals returning to the same locations again and again. Not wandering, not grazing, returning. Fences, gates, barricades, closed access roads, even private property boundaries. The footage shows deer approaching these obstacles, pausing, retreating just out of frame, and then coming back minutes later. Sometimes hours later. Sometimes days. Always the same spots. Always the same paths. Officials have been careful with their language. In every briefing, the same phrase is repeated. There is no evidence of intelligence. And yet, they have declined to release the full recordings. Only still frames, short clips, cropped angles. When pressed on why, spokespersons cite public misinterpretation, panic risk, and contextual sensitivity. But several field technicians have contacted the station directly, off record, describing footage that is difficult to reconcile with standard animal behavior. Deer testing the same fence post repeatedly, not with force, but with consistency. Antlers pressed lightly against metal, withdrawn, then reapplied at the exact same point. One technician described it as checking a door, then immediately corrected himself and said, "No, checking if the door is still there." Listeners should understand what makes this disturbing. Wildlife avoids barriers it cannot breach. It adapts routes. It learns through avoidance. What is being observed now is not avoidance. It is repetition without adjustment. The same failure attempted again and again, as if the outcome is expected to change, or as if the action itself is the point. We've reviewed multiple listener-submitted accounts that align with the footage. Property owners in rural zones report hearing steady, rhythmic contact at the edges of their land late at night. Not crashing, not charging, just tapping. A gate rattling softly at intervals too regular to be wind. A fence wire flexing and settling for hours. One caller said she looked out her kitchen window at 2:14 a.m. and saw 3 deer standing in a line facing her backyard fence. They did not look at her. They did not react when the light turned on. They simply stepped forward one at a time, touched the barrier, stepped back, and waited. When asked how long this continued, she said, "Until I stopped watching." That detail matters. Officials continue to emphasize that there is no sign of higher cognition, no tool use, no problem-solving progression. But repetition itself is not neutral. In nature, it usually signals distress, compulsion, or neurological disruption. Veterinarians familiar with stereotypic behavior, repetitive actions seen in captive animals under extreme stress, have noted similarities. But these animals are not confined. They are not starved. They are not reacting to visible threats. And yet, they are behaving as if constrained by something that isn't physically present. Internal guidance circulated among field teams advises against attempting to reinforce barriers or engage deterrents at these sites. The reason given is vague. Behavioral escalation observed following intervention. That phrase has not been explained. What has been confirmed is that after certain fences were electrified or reinforced, the animals did not disperse. They remained, returned sooner, stayed longer, and in some cases, more animals joined them. There is growing concern among ecologists that whatever is driving this behavior is not localized. Trail camera timestamps show synchronized activity across distances that migration patterns cannot explain. Deer testing a gate in one county at 1:03 a.m., while another herd does the same thing at a locked service road nearly 200 miles away within the same minute. This is not herd behavior spreading through proximity. This is parallel action without contact. And that raises questions no one is ready to answer on record. Authorities insist the animals are not communicating. No audible signals. No pheromone trails detected beyond normal levels. But silence has been a defining feature of this event from the beginning. No warning calls, no agitation sounds, no environmental noise at all. The absence itself has become part of the pattern. If you are in a rural area and you hear repeated contact at a boundary, do not investigate alone. Do not attempt to scare the animals away. Do not film from close range. Wildlife services are asking residents to remain indoors and report activity without engagement. One final detail from the footage that officials acknowledged only after sustained questioning. In several recordings, the deer stop moving at the exact moment the camera's infrared indicator activates. They remain still for the duration of the recording window. Then, once the camera powers down, movement resumes. Experts caution against overinterpretation, but the timing has been described internally as consistent enough to note. We will continue to bring you verified updates as they arrive. Keep your radios on. Stay aware of your surroundings, especially at boundaries, fences, gates, property lines. And remember, in the wild, repetition without adaptation is not curiosity. It is a warning sign that something fundamental has shifted. This is Mike Clark. You're listening to an extended public safety and wildlife emergency broadcast. What we're addressing now is no longer confined to behavior alone. Within the last several hours, state and federal agencies have issued a formal health advisory regarding an unknown illness affecting wildlife populations, primarily deer, but not exclusively. The wording of that advisory is careful, almost restrained, but the implications are not. The public is being warned, explicitly, not to approach, touch, assist, relocate, or euthanize affected animals under any circumstances. That includes situations where the animal appears injured, immobile, or distressed. Officials state that observed symptoms exceed anything documented in chronic wasting disease, rabies, or known parasitic infections. Transmission vectors remain unconfirmed. That phrase is doing a lot of work right now. What's being reported from the field does not fit established models of wildlife illness. Animals are not displaying the expected progression. No gradual loss of coordination, no typical fear response, no consistent signs of starvation. Instead, responders describe rigidity followed by sudden movement, prolonged stillness without collapse, and an absence of visible distress even in conditions that should provoke flight. In some cases, animals remain standing for hours. In others, they lie down and rise again without visible effort. There are reports of ocular clouding, abnormal jaw tension, and vocal silence even when surrounded by stimuli. Wildlife veterinarians have admitted in closed briefings that they are documenting symptoms without naming them, because naming implies understanding. And right now, there is none. Listeners should understand the seriousness of the advisory. When officials tell the public not to euthanize suffering animals, it is not out of concern for animal welfare alone. It is because contact, direct or indirect, may carry risk. Blood, saliva, antler tissue, soil disturbed by hooves. All are being treated as potential vectors until proven otherwise. Hunters are being told to suspend all activity indefinitely. Game processing facilities have been shut down without timelines. Roadkill removal crews are operating under new protective protocols, and in some regions, not operating at all. Vehicles are being instructed to avoid collisions if possible, not because of traffic concerns, but because post-impact handling has become a liability. At the same time this advisory was issued, a second development emerged, one that is changing how communities are being told to prepare. Migration routes are shifting, not gradually, not seasonally, abruptly. Deer are abandoning established corridors that once ran through forests, wetlands, and conservation land, and are instead following older dormant paths, routes that predate modern development. Paths that now cut directly through residential neighborhoods, school zones, industrial parks, and town centers. These are not random appearances. Mapping data shows alignment. The animals are moving along lines that once connected water, shelter, and elevation, lines now overlaid with streets, backyards, and storefronts. Residents across multiple states are reporting deer appearing at the same intersections night after night, standing at cul-de-sacs, walking sidewalks, stopping at playground fences. There is little evidence of foraging, little evidence of confusion. They move with purpose, but not urgency. Authorities are urging people to secure properties, lock doors, close gates, reinforce sheds, not because of aggression, but because of proximity. After dusk, residents are advised to remain indoors, not as a curfew, as a precaution. What's unsettling officials most is the timing. These movements are occurring primarily at night and during early pre-dawn hours, not during peak feeding times, not during daylight displacement. The animals are arriving in populated areas when human visibility is lowest, when response times are slower, when encounters are more likely to be accidental and close range. Emergency services emphasize that residents should not attempt to herd, redirect, or scare the animals away. Traditional deterrents, lights, noise, motion triggers, have shown inconsistent or no effect. In some cases, animals pause, observe, and continue forward. We've received messages from listeners describing scenes that would have sounded exaggerated a week ago. A family in a suburban development reports waking to find their street lined with deer, standing between parked cars, unmoving. A night shift worker describes nearly colliding with a deer that did not react to headlights until physical contact occurred, and then did not flee. Another listener says the animals seem to follow the edges of properties, tracing fences and walls, as if guided by something just out of view. Officials caution against drawing conclusions, but they are no longer dismissing these accounts. There is an unspoken shift happening in the language of briefings. Early statements emphasized reassurance. Now, the focus is on distance, separation, minimizing interaction. When authorities advise people to stay indoors after dusk, it is not because the animals are attacking. It is because unpredictability has replaced instinct. Wildlife behavior relies on patterns, fear, hunger, mating, migration. When those patterns dissolve, risk increases, even without intent. Health departments are coordinating with environmental agencies, not law enforcement. Another detail worth noting. This is being treated as a biological unknown first, a public safety issue second. Testing is underway, but results are slow. Samples degrade. Field conditions complicate containment. And every day, the affected zone appears to widen, not leap forward, but seep outward, like something following the path of least resistance. If you live near wooded areas, green belts, or former wildlife corridors, take this advisory seriously. Keep doors locked. Avoid outdoor activity at night. Do not leave pet food outside. Do not attempt to document encounters at close range. And if you encounter an animal that appears unresponsive, do not assume it is injured or docile. Distance is your protection right now. We are continuing this broadcast because information is the only thing moving faster than speculation. If guidance changes, you will hear it here. If clarity arrives, we will share it. Until then, understand this. When migration shifts toward people, it is not coincidence. It is displacement. And displacement always means something has gone wrong somewhere else first. This is Mike Clark. Stay inside after dark. Keep your radios on. And do not mistake silence for safety. This is Mike Clark. We're continuing extended emergency coverage as new information comes in, and tonight's update marks a shift in tone that I want to be clear about from the start. What authorities initially described as a tragic but ordinary accident is now under active investigation as the first potential fatality connected to the ongoing wildlife event. Earlier today, local police reported the death of a civilian in a rural adjacent residential zone, stating that the circumstances appeared accidental. That language has now been withdrawn. Witness statements, physical evidence, and timeline inconsistencies have forced a reassessment. Investigators are no longer confident this death can be explained without considering coordinated animal involvement. According to preliminary reports, the individual was found outdoors near their property line shortly after dusk. There were no signs of forced entry, no indication of a struggle with another person, and notably, no bite marks, no claw wounds, no traditional indicators of animal attack. That absence is what triggered the review. Multiple neighbors have since come forward independently, describing the same detail. Deer present in the area at the time, moving in a way witnesses described as grouped, deliberate, and blocking. One witness stated that the animals did not scatter when approached, nor when lights were activated. Another reported that the animals appeared to reposition as the individual moved, maintaining distance without retreating. Authorities are being careful with language, but the word coordinated has now entered internal documentation. This is important to understand. Wildlife coordination is not unheard of, but it is rare, situational, and typically defensive. What is being described here does not fit known defensive behavior. There was no charge, no visible aggression. Instead, responders describe a containment-like pattern, animals occupying space, limiting movement, and remaining present until the incident concluded. Again, no physical trauma consistent with an attack. The cause of death has not been publicly released. Medical examiners are withholding conclusions pending further analysis, citing environmental factors and physiological stress indicators. That phrase has not been expanded on yet. Listeners should be aware that authorities are asking the public not to speculate, but they are also no longer dismissing reports of structured animal behavior. Trail footage, eyewitness accounts, and emergency call logs are being cross-referenced. This is not being treated as folklore or panic. It is being treated as an anomaly with consequences. At the same time, a second development is complicating response efforts and risk assessment. Cold temperatures, sustained freezing conditions, have not reduced activity among affected animals. This contradicts every established expectation. Wildlife biologists have confirmed that under normal circumstances, deer conserve energy in cold weather. Movement slows. Exposure is minimized. Herds shelter. Instead, reports show continued mobility during overnight freezes, prolonged standing on exposed ground, and sustained activity without visible fatigue. Thermal imaging from state agencies confirms body temperatures that do not align with known metabolic responses. Officials are choosing their words carefully here. They are not saying the animals are immune to cold. They are saying the animals are behaving as though cold is irrelevant. That distinction matters. One field report notes deer remaining motionless in sub-freezing wind for extended periods, then moving suddenly without visible stiffness or hesitation. Another describes animals crossing frozen ground and shallow ice without signs of discomfort or instability. These observations are not isolated. They are consistent across regions experiencing similar temperature drops. From a physiological standpoint, this raises difficult questions. Energy expenditure without caloric intake. Muscle function without rest. Exposure without visible stress response. These are not traits that allow an organism to survive long-term under known biological rules, which leads to the concern officials are not stating outright. Either the rules are being bypassed, or something is temporarily compensating for them. Emergency planners are now adjusting advisories accordingly. Cold weather is no longer being treated as a mitigating factor. Residents are being told not to assume that freezing temperatures will slow movement, reduce encounters, or create natural barriers. Nighttime activity remains the highest risk period, regardless of temperature. In some regions, increased activity has been reported during cold snaps, not less. No explanation has been offered. We've received messages from listeners who believed colder nights would bring relief. They did what people have always done, waited for nature to correct itself. That expectation is proving unreliable. One listener wrote that deer stood outside their home through the night as frost formed on the ground, unmoving until just before sunrise. Another described seeing tracks in fresh snow that looped repeatedly around the same structures, as if testing boundaries. Officials have declined to comment on pattern repetition, but have acknowledged receiving similar reports. There is also growing concern among first responders. Standard assumptions, fatigue, hypothermia, limited endurance, are used to plan response and containment. When those assumptions fail, margin for error disappears. Officers and wildlife personnel are being instructed to maintain distance, avoid engagement, and prioritize observation over intervention. This is not caution. This is uncertainty management. We need to talk plainly for a moment. The combination of a civilian death under review and animals remaining active beyond expected limits changes the risk profile. This is no longer just a question of disease or displacement. It is a question of predictability. When behavior cannot be anticipated, safety guidance becomes broader, more restrictive, and less comfortable. That is what you are hearing now. If you are in an affected area, do not rely on weather as protection. Do not assume visibility equals safety. Do not approach animals that appear inactive or unresponsive. And do not interpret lack of aggression as lack of danger. Whatever is happening is not expressing itself through violence in the way people expect. That makes it harder to recognize and harder to avoid. Investigators continue to stress that there is no evidence of intentional harm. That phrasing is deliberate. Intent requires motive. Right now, motive is undefined. Movement is observable. Outcome is measurable. The space between them is what authorities are trying to understand. We will continue broadcasting verified updates as they come in. If guidance changes, you'll hear it here. Until then, limit exposure. Stay indoors after dark. Keep distance during daylight. And remember that familiarity is not safety. These animals look the same. That does not mean they are behaving the same. This is Mike Clark. Keep your radios on. Stay alert. And do not assume that cold means quiet anymore. This is Mike Clark. We're continuing extended coverage as new reports confirm a development that's forcing officials to reframe what they thought they were dealing with. Agricultural damage across multiple counties has now exceeded every baseline used to classify normal wildlife activity. Farmers are reporting losses that don't align with feeding, migration, panic, or territorial behavior. Crops aren't being eaten. They're being flattened. Fences aren't being tested or breached at weak points. They're being pushed down in sections. Storage sheds show impact marks without evidence of entry. Gates are displaced without signs of forced manipulation. Whatever is moving through these areas is interacting with the landscape, but not for nourishment. Field investigators emphasize this distinction because motive matters. Wildlife damage is usually explainable through need. Hunger, shelter, stress. What's being documented now lacks that logic. Cornfields trampled without a single stalk consumed. Hay bales knocked apart and left untouched. Orchard rows broken at trunk height with no bark stripping. One farmer described it as pressure without purpose, saying it looked less like animals feeding and more like something passing through and testing resistance as it went. That phrasing, testing resistance, has appeared in more than one report, though officials avoid repeating it publicly. The scale is also notable. Damage patterns stretch across properties in straight corridors, not scattered paths. GPS overlays show lines of impact that ignore natural contours, fencing layouts, and access points. In several cases, deer appear to have moved directly through reinforced barriers instead of around them, despite easier routes being available. This matters because animals conserve energy. They choose efficiency. The behavior being observed is not efficient. It is direct. Agricultural agencies are struggling to advise next steps. Compensation frameworks rely on cause classification, and right now, classification is unresolved. Farmers are being told not to attempt deterrence, not to use lights or sound, and not to patrol fields at night. The guidance is simple but unsettling. Document damage during daylight, remain indoors after dusk, and do not attempt to intervene. Several growers have asked the same question in different ways. If the animals aren't feeding, what are they doing? There is no answer being offered yet. Alongside these reports, a second anomaly is drawing increasing attention from responders and wildlife officers on the ground. Eye reflection behavior, something so basic it's usually taken for granted, has changed. Deer eyes typically reflect light due to a layer called the tapetum lucidum. It's why headlights catch that familiar glow at night. Responders are now documenting cases where that reflection is absent, muted, or altered in color and angle. Flashlights produce no response. Vehicle beams illuminate the animal, but the eyes absorb the light instead of returning it. Officials are being extremely careful with wording here. Public statements describe this as a lighting inconsistency pending analysis. Internally, it's being logged as an anomaly. Body cameras from 2 separate departments show deer staring directly into high-intensity light sources without the expected eyeshine. In some footage, the eyes appear dark regardless of angle. In others, reflection occurs briefly, then vanishes as the animal adjusts its head. Something that should not happen under normal conditions. This has operational consequences. Eye reflection is a primary safety cue. It tells drivers when an animal is present. It tells officers where an animal is looking. Without it, depth, intent, and awareness become harder to judge. Several near-miss incidents have already been reported where drivers did not see animals until they were within braking distance, despite clear line of sight and functional headlights. Authorities are now advising reduced speeds in rural zones even during clear weather, acknowledging that visual detection methods may be unreliable. There is also a psychological effect being reported by responders. Multiple individuals have independently described the experience of shining a light on an animal and receiving no visual feedback as disorienting and wrong. That language is subjective, but it's consistent. One officer noted that without eye reflection, it was difficult to tell whether the animal was aware of him at all. Another said it felt like looking at a shape rather than a living thing. These statements are being recorded, not dismissed. Biologists are cautious about speculation. Changes in eye reflection can occur due to disease, injury, or environmental factors. But what's complicating analysis is consistency. This isn't one herd or one location. Reports span multiple regions and lighting conditions. Different equipment, different observers. Same outcome. No reflection, delayed reflection, or reflection that doesn't behave as expected. That uniformity suggests this is not a random defect. When combined with the agricultural damage, a pattern begins to emerge. Interaction without consumption, movement without apparent fatigue, presence without the usual sensory cues. None of these elements alone would justify alarm. Together, they remove assumptions that both civilians and professionals rely on to stay safe. Farmers listening tonight have been asking what to do next. The honest answer is that guidance is still evolving. For now, reinforce buildings rather than fields. Secure equipment indoors. Avoid nighttime checks. Use daylight for assessment only. Motion lights are no longer recommended as deterrents. They may not provide the feedback you expect. To the broader public, understand this. What's happening is not being described as aggression, but it is being described as pressure. Pressure on infrastructure, pressure on routines, pressure on systems built around predictability. And predictability is what keeps people safe. We'll continue to monitor updates from agricultural agencies, wildlife services, and emergency management. If classifications change, if explanations emerge, you'll hear them here first. Clearly, carefully, and without exaggeration. This is Mike Clark. Keep your distance. Keep your lights on, but don't trust what they show you. And remember, when familiar signs stop behaving the way they always have, that's when caution matters most. This is Mike Clark. We're staying on the air as reports continue to come in from multiple rural districts, many of them describing the same phenomenon with different words, but the same uncertainty. Residents are reporting large-scale movement through fog during overnight hours. Not individual animals, not scattered motion, but something broader. Callers are struggling to describe it clearly, and that hesitation itself is notable. They don't say they saw deer moving through the forest. They say the forest appeared to move. These reports are coming in from valleys, from wooded farmland, from areas where fog settles thick and low after sunset. People describe looking out from porches, from second-story windows, from parked vehicles, and seeing the tree line lose definition. At first, they assume it's just fog density shifting. Then they notice the fog isn't drifting independently. It's advancing in blocks. Lines of darker mass moving where trees should be still. One caller said the edge of the woods came closer without getting clearer. Another said it felt like depth itself was compressing. Officials stress that visual accuracy is compromised under these conditions. Fog refracts light. Darkness removes reference points. The human brain fills gaps. That is the official explanation, and it is being repeated carefully. But what's complicating this reassurance is the timing. These reports coincide precisely with the hours when other activity has been logged. Motion sensors triggering without identifiable heat signatures. Pressure sensors activating in patterns too wide for single animals. And sound recordings capturing synchronized movement without vocalization. Several residents independently mentioned the same detail. No sound. Not just a lack of animal noise, but an absence of the secondary sounds that usually accompany movement. Branches snapping, undergrowth shifting, leaves scattering. One caller said it was like watching a shadow slide across a wall, except the wall was the woods behind their house. Another said the fog seemed to carry weight, flattening the night rather than floating in it. Emergency management agencies have declined to confirm these accounts, citing insufficient visibility and the absence of corroborating visual data. Thermal imaging has been attempted, but results are inconsistent. In some cases, large cold zones appear where movement is reported. In others, sensors register displacement without temperature change. These contradictions are still under review. What's clear is that residents are altering behavior. People are no longer stepping outside to investigate. Porch lights are being left off. Windows are being covered. Several callers admitted they stayed silent inside their homes, listening, waiting for something to pass. When asked what they heard, most paused before answering. The most common response was simply, pressure. No footsteps, no calls, just the sense that something was there, moving close enough to be felt, if not clearly seen. Authorities are advising residents in fog-prone areas to remain indoors after dusk, avoid using spotlights or floodlights into wooded areas, and to keep doors and secondary structures secured. There is no evacuation order at this time, but officials acknowledge that fog conditions significantly limit response capability. In a related development, all hunting activities have now been suspended indefinitely across affected regions. This decision follows a series of failed neutralization attempts that officials are only now acknowledging publicly. Veteran hunters, individuals with decades of experience in wildlife control and population management, have refused further deployment after initial encounters produced results that did not align with expectations. According to internal briefings, ammunition effectiveness is under review. Standard rounds produced confirmed impact, but inconsistent outcomes. Some animals did not react as expected to non-lethal deterrents. Others showed delayed response to direct hits. In several cases, animals continued moving after impacts that would normally result in immediate incapacitation. Officials are careful to avoid specific terminology here, but the implication is clear. Established assumptions about vulnerability no longer apply. Hunters involved in these attempts have declined interviews, but written statements provided through representatives share a consistent tone. Words like unresponsive, unfazed, and incorrect appear repeatedly. Incorrect not in aim, but in outcome. One veteran described the experience as realizing, mid-action, that the situation no longer followed the rules he had trained under his entire life. This refusal is unprecedented. These are individuals accustomed to difficult conditions, ethical decision-making under pressure, and controlled risk. Their withdrawal has left agencies without a key tool, and officials are now emphasizing containment and observation rather than intervention. Public guidance has shifted accordingly. Residents are being told not to attempt defense or deterrence. Firearms are not recommended. Spotting scopes, night vision, and thermal optics are discouraged, not because they're ineffective, but because they may provide misleading information. The risk now is not just what you might encounter, but what you might misinterpret. There's also concern about escalation. Failed neutralization attempts appear to correlate with increased movement afterward. Whether this is coincidence or response is still being evaluated. For now, the directive is clear. Do not engage. Listeners have asked what this means long term. The honest answer is that authorities don't yet know. Monitoring continues. Data is being collected. Patterns are being mapped. But every update seems to remove certainty rather than add it. If you're listening tonight and you live near forested areas, take this seriously without panicking. Secure your home. Stay indoors during fog events. Do not follow movement sounds. Do not investigate visual anomalies. Report observations calmly and accurately, without embellishment, even if what you're describing feels strange to say out loud. We are still gathering information. We are still trying to understand what fits within known behavior and what does not. What matters now is patience, caution, and awareness. This is Mike Clark. We'll remain on the air as long as we can, bringing you verified updates and measured guidance. If the forest looks closer than it should, trust distance, not curiosity. And if silence feels heavier than usual, don't try to break it. This is Mike Clark, coming to you live on radio. I want to start tonight's broadcast with a warning and some practical advice that's not easy to deliver, but absolutely necessary. Emergency management agencies across the region are now recommending a town-wide blackout after dark. This isn't a power-saving initiative, and it isn't a routine drill. Reports indicate that the deer we've been tracking, the ones showing unusual behavior, the ones we've described over the past weeks, are increasingly drawn to light. Exterior lighting, porch lamps, street lights, anything that creates a visible outline after sundown appears to act like a magnet. So if you live in an affected zone, turn off what you can, block what you can't, and prepare for a night where you cannot rely on visibility for safety. I know this is unsettling. Darkness feels like vulnerability, especially when the unknown is already pressing against your windows and doors. But remember, in this situation, movement or attention draws attention. Lights make you a beacon. The advice from local authorities is clear. Reduce exposure. Reduce stimuli. Avoid attracting the animals that are now behaving in ways we cannot yet fully understand. This isn't about fear for fear's sake. It's about containment and minimizing risk. Listeners are calling in tonight with updates from their neighborhoods, and the pattern is consistent. One resident described walking through her yard earlier this evening, just before the recommended blackout, and noticing shadows shifting unnaturally along the edge of the woods. Not ordinary movement, not normal herd patterns, but slow, deliberate progression. She emphasized that she didn't see individual animals clearly. She saw the shapes, the press of bodies moving almost as a single entity, following paths that should have been familiar, yet now seem foreign. Her takeaway, like many others, do not engage, do not attempt to illuminate, do not step outside unless there is an immediate and unavoidable need. Another caller from the north side of town reported that multiple streetlights went out spontaneously just after dusk. Technicians were unable to confirm the cause immediately, but residents on the block said the darkness coincided with the arrival of a herd near the perimeter. One person described standing at a window and seeing circular shapes moving in formation, hesitant, almost calculating. We cannot confirm whether these movements are intentional, coordinated, or instinctive, but the reports are strikingly similar across unrelated areas. Now, in addition to the blackout, we have new developments regarding unexplained hoofprints appearing around occupied homes. These tracks are circular, not following any identifiable feeding pattern, and often appear in front yards, driveways, and along garden edges without evidence of intrusion. Residents report waking to these prints in the morning, sometimes more than once, and authorities caution strongly against investigating on your own. Observation from inside is the only recommended action. People who have submitted photographs or footage of these hoofprints describe them as unnervingly regular, almost deliberate in placement. Some appear in concentric patterns around entry points or windows, almost like someone, or something, is testing boundaries without crossing them. Field teams sent to verify these tracks report hesitation, noting the formations don't resemble ordinary animal behavior. There is no disturbance of soil, no feeding evidence, no scent markers. And yet, these prints appear consistently. What we know so far, and what you need to act on, is this. Visibility is dangerous after dark, and proximity is even more dangerous. Do not investigate. Do not attempt deterrence. Do not attempt to follow the tracks or place cameras outside. Authorities are still analyzing motion sensor data, thermal imaging, and eyewitness reports. Until more is confirmed, your best strategy is observation from a secure location. Keep doors locked, windows covered, and stay out of the yard. Avoid flashlight beams or any reflective surface that might catch movement. Several residents have asked if these behaviors are seasonal or weather-related. At this time, there is no evidence that changes in temperature, moon phase, or precipitation are influencing the patterns. The common denominator is proximity to human habitation, and increasingly, artificial light. Where light is present, movement is noted. Where light is absent, reports are fewer, though not non-existent. It's also worth noting that the psychological impact of observing these movements, combined with the blackout, is significant. People have reported difficulty sleeping, heightened anxiety, and in some cases, moments of irrational caution. Checking locked doors every half hour, refusing to step outside even briefly, and hesitating to answer calls at night. These reactions are normal under the circumstances. The recommendation is to remain calm, keep essential supplies at hand, and avoid unnecessary exposure to the exterior environment. We continue to receive tips from listeners about unusual sounds, subtle pressure along windowsills, and fleeting glimpses of silhouettes near property lines. None of these reports have been independently verified yet, but when multiple accounts describe the same anomalous behaviors, patterns emerge that are difficult to dismiss. This is why we repeat: observation only. No engagement. The objective is survival, not confrontation. For families in affected areas, ensure children and pets remain indoors. If you must move outside during the day, do so in groups, remain alert, and avoid attracting attention with noise or light. For individuals living alone, check in with neighbors by phone or text, but do not attempt in-person verification. Establishing a network of communication is crucial, even when physical contact is unsafe. And finally, for those monitoring from the outskirts of affected zones, take these recommendations seriously, even if your property has not yet been affected. Precaution now may prevent escalation later. Blackouts, circular hoofprints, and organized animal behavior are signs that the usual assumptions about wildlife interaction no longer apply. This is Mike Clark, staying on the air as long as possible on radio. We will continue to bring verified updates, first-hand reports, and clear guidance. Remember, stay inside, reduce lighting, observe quietly, and trust the precautions. Tonight, darkness is your shield, not your enemy. Maintain vigilance, remain calm, and keep communication open through safe channels. This broadcast is intended to protect life, minimize exposure, and provide clarity in uncertainty. Your cooperation and caution may be the difference between a routine night and a dangerous encounter. We will continue monitoring, and we will keep you informed. Stay safe.